going to jump right in. My name is Lisa Gear. I'm the Dean of Admissions at Southwestern. As I mentioned to those of you that were on a few minutes ago, I am by myself tonight. So I'm going to do my best to kind of get through the slides. This is being recorded, so you can certainly come and find this. It'll be on our YouTube channel. I don't know if it'll make it there before the holiday break, but it'll get there shortly after if it doesn't. So if some of the slides, some of them have a lot of information on them. I'll just tell you that right now. All of the information that we're sharing all actually comes from the LSAC website. Oh yes, thank you so much. I will enable that. There you go. So you can get all of this information directly from the LSAC site too. So where it looks like we're kind of in the weeds, I'm just trying to give you that information in case you haven't seen it before, but it is also available to you via lsac.org. If you just search for CAS, Credential Assembly Service, that's the topic for tonight. You're going to find the vast majority of the information that I go over there. I just hope to kind of distill it down in a more palatable way for you. So that's kind of my goal. So if you wouldn't mind, try to hold your questions until I ask for questions, because I can't really see hands being raised when I start to share my screen. So I'm going to try to do the majority of the slides before we do Q&A, and then we can knock out as many questions as you have in that time remaining for us to end at 5:30 Pacific time. Okay, sounds good. We got a plan. All righty. So I'm going to start to share my screen. Okay, Isabella, you're the first person I can actually see. So can you nod or give me a thumbs up if you can see my screen? Wonderful. Thank you. Okay. So I mentioned the Credential Assembly Service, this CAS report. It's a big deal. It's a very important part of the application process. For those that may not know, when you apply to law schools, we receive on our end 2 electronic files for you. One is the electronic application that you submitted for each law school. The other is going to be this CAS report. And so in the CAS report, we have a number of things. We've got this banner sheet, which I'll go over all of these, of course, in greater detail, but we got the banner sheet, which is going to be basically a summary of everything else that's in the file, plus some other information that's been calculated for us to kind of give us a quick snapshot of what we're looking for. We're going to have information about your undergraduate performance. It's going to actually track each year that you were in school with notations and whatnot. We're going to see if there was any issue, any kind of irregularity or misconduct in the application process. And then we're also going to get your LSAT writing sample. One is required, but if you've taken the test more than once, you'll be given the option to do more than one writing sample. So we'll get a copy of each of those. And that one being required is not a Southwestern rule. That is an LSAC rule. So where there are those kinds of distinctions, I will try to make those for you. But without at least one LSAT writing sample on file with LSAC will not release your LSAT score to the schools that you are applying. Now, it could be possible that any law school that you're looking at could require you take additional LSAT writing samples, but the baseline is going to be one. We'll actually get the actual copies, PDF copies of the transcripts that you submit, which include any graduate transcripts as well. We will get copies of those if you do submit them, if you happen to have any post-undergraduate work. Letters of recommendation, we'll also get copies of those. And then sometimes there are these documents that we get from LSAC. I put up there the price. For some of you, it's probably not going to be any new information because most of you have already signed up for the LSAT, so you're probably a little further into the pricing structure. But for those that are maybe a little bit newer to this process, haven't gotten quite as far, there is a fee waiver process that you can apply for. This is through lsac.org. And there's, whatever their requirements are, but it can allow you to have these types of fees waived, plus the law school application fees were applicable too. Okay, So the banner sheet, we're going to kind of break it down into thirds because it's too tiny to try to show you one, letter size document all at one time. So this happens to be the top. And these are just some samples that are kind of pulled together. This is not necessarily one applicant that we're going to use throughout. So you'll see in this particular one, this was for the fall of 2018 that this screenshot was taken. But it's not really changed. This still looks the same. So we're going to have your name. We're going to have your major, some other bio and demographic information. We're going to have on that upper right-hand corner the list of all of the institutions you've attended. These also can come from the transcripts too. So a lot of this information kind of goes back and forth. So if your transcript notes that you attended another school, that's a flag to LSAC that they're waiting for a transcript. And so also it becomes a flag to us. And then you'll see here on the bottom left under the background section, there's notes from transcript. So in this particular example, this candidate had some academic honors. Sometimes there are other kinds of notations here. There could be academic probation. There could be a financial obligation, which means that they note somewhere that you have attended this institution, but they don't have a transcript for you because of a financial obligation that you might have outstanding. So there can be all sorts of different types of things, but the academic honors and the academic probation are probably the two most common, if anything, that show up under this section. And it's important that I remind you all that you need to get a copy of every undergraduate transcript. And we're going to go through like what defines an undergrad, but I'm just going to, sort of put that blanket statement out there now, but you should get a copy of all of yours, just like you would your credit report for those of you that know to do that, because every once in a while there is something that's an error on the transcript. And it's not actually, the grade you earned or the notation that you're familiar with. And sometimes you can have that corrected, but I will warn you, it can take a long time. So you want to get your hands on those copies as soon as possible, just to make sure that you're giving yourself as much time to correct anything as possible in this process. Okay. So here's the middle. This is probably the hardest to kind of digest. But what we gather from this information, and I kind of, circled and pointed to some more key things, but in the upper two rows that are going across the tiny little numbers and the numbers below them, that's all pointing to your degree school. So for example, UCLA is our number one feeder. It's the number one feeder school for many law schools. So we'll just pick on UCLA for a second. This is not, but we'll just pick on UCLA. This is saying if you attended UCLA and that's where you obtained your bachelor's degree, then this percentage of LSAT is a reflection of the past 3 years of students applying to law schools from UCLA specifically. So what that means, so we're just going to try to remember here because you can't see the bottom, but if if you look at that little blue square where it says, from 45 to 49, that's the percentile of the LSAT. Okay, it's not the actual score, it's the percentile of LSAT. And there was 5% of the people from this school scored in that percentile range of the LSAT. So what that really kind of tells us is we kind of look at what's high and we look at what's low. It gives us a sense of how other candidates might be faring on the LSAT from that same degree school. So it just gives us a little bit of that kind of contextual information. Hopefully that all makes sense. I know it's kind of complicated. What you see in the green rectangle there that's highlighting the years of attendance. So we can very quickly see how long you've been in school, if there were gaps in your education, that type of thing. Then we also see kind of below it, this particular person only attended one school. So that college, excuse me, and the college code, if you look at the descriptions on the left, are not changing because it's only one school. But if you attended multiple schools, it would just kind of change as the years progressed. Then semester hours, those are your credits. So we can kind of see, did you take a lighter load, a heavier load? Again, a lot of this is just supposed to be sort of at a glance. And then GPA and cum GPA / college kind of meet, and then the bottom one, the cum across GPA, those are going to tell us different things. So if you've attended more than one school, you're going to see certain numbers kind of change. And so, maybe we'll update this slide next time to show somebody who attended more than one school so you can kind of see the difference. But as you progress through your undergraduate coursework, let's say you attended a community college, for 2 years, and then you went to your 4-year degree school. You're going to see, of course, those 2 schools listed here. We're going to see the semester hours at each individual school. We're going to see what the GPA was per year or per term if you were only there for 1 term for each individual. Then we're going to get the cum. And then the cum across GPA sometimes can be a little bit different. And that ultimately is the kind of final GPA calculation, if you will. And we'll kind of get into that a little bit more. I'll explain how LSAC does that. And then similarly, we get this tally. That's the bottom sort of section of this middle part that tells us, right, how many units you had with these sorts of grades. So in this particular case, somebody had 22 units of A's, 55 units of B's, etc. Okay, again, just a snapshot. Okay, the bottom is where we're going to see your LSAT score information. And so we use this one to kind of just illustrate that for those of you who may have taken a prior test, before May of 2020, they do show up a little bit differently on the report. And so that is kind of how LSAC has chosen to display them. So they're not part of the average. The average is only anything since May of 2020. But we do get the score bands. We obviously get to see when the test was administered, and then your score, and then that percentile rank. This kind of goes back to, this slide right here when we were talking about this is the percentile. That's what we're looking at right here. This is the percent rank of this particular set of LSAT scores. So we kind of, again, can see, how many times you've taken it. If you've had any cancellations, you see there's like a little key right here, A for absent, C for candidate cancel, V for test violations, etc. So what I will tell you about this, and this is just my personal 2 cents, take it for what you will, is that while you can take the LSAT more than once, it is available to you. It is not the general advice to plan to take it more than once, right? If you need to take it, by all means, that's your choice. I would encourage you to try to prepare for it differently if you're going to retake the test. There was a large number of you that were planning to retake. You want to, lead with your best foot, in all of things of your application. You want to be your most confident version of yourself. And it is hard to come back from lower scores. I'll just be honest about that. It's hard to come back from taking the test many, many, many times. So this candidate also is shown as an example in some ways kind of as what not to do, despite the fact that their scores are relatively good. It kind of shows a little bit of bad judgment. And again, that's my opinion. Some people will tell you, take the test as many times as you can. But if you don't have that LSAC fee waiver, the tests are expensive. And the waiver only covers so many administrations, as it is. So be mindful, have a plan in place. Like I said, if you need to take it again, the option is there. But some people haven't even taken the test and they just plan to take it more than once. And I just don't think that's necessarily the best course of action. You want to work backwards from when you want to apply to the law schools. Like literally what month, what day. You should be mindful of application deadlines. You should keep a master spreadsheet of all of that type of information, what every school is requiring, when they're requiring it by, how they advise you on certain questions that you may have about what to submit. And then work backwards from that to kind of come up with your timeline to not only take the test, but, to get your letters. Some of you are still in the process of choosing. So it is still early in the cycle, but, you don't want to still be in that same space, a day before an application deadline, because then it's just kind of chaotic for you. So plan early, submit early, but submit when your application, could sort of be at its peak strength. Okay. All right. So this is an example of something that LSAC may just include in the file. So We started to get these as soon as the LSAT Flex. That's what they called the test during the height of COVID, the first test that went online. They called them the Flex. They've now since kind of dropped that terminology, even though the tests are still online. But we would get these just notices. They're nothing that you need to worry about, but just thought we'd show you the kind of information that we get. Okay, the writing sample I mentioned, you need to have at least one. Excuse me. You cannot take it at the same sitting of the LSAT itself. You have to complete it in a slightly different time frame. What I will tell you about that, and hopefully you can just read the slide while I kind of just talk about it. What I will tell you about the writing sample is that it's nothing for you to overly worry about. It doesn't matter which side of the argument you pick. Basically they give you a set of facts and they want you to kind of pick a side and then defend it. We don't care which side you pick. It really makes no difference to us. We have no bias about it. But we just want to see you take an honest attempt at it. That's the most important part, right? You just want to be thoughtful, take the time. Don't worry a ton about, the grammar and the punctuation. There is a little bit of a spell check feature. So, for the most part, you shouldn't really have any misspelled words. So this really isn't a judge of your, grammar and spelling, because, these days in word processing, there are a lot of those tools available to you to kind of fix that. This is really just to kind of see how you frame an argument, what your thought process is. If we're looking at a bullseye, or are you getting kind of closer to the middle of it, or are you way outside the border of the frame, right? So again, it doesn't matter which position you take. Just take it seriously. This is a little bit of what it will look like if you haven't taken the LSAT yet, or haven't done the writing sample portion yet. You won't know that, but just you can kind of see here. So you get this little tiny box, and you can, again, read it, fill out your response. I mentioned that on the banner sheet, we get a notation if there's any kind of misconduct. So this is an area where unfortunately a lot of misconduct can occur. So when you take the test remotely, you're given very specific instructions. And for those of you that have already done it, you'll know what I'm talking about. Right, they have the camera, they have the proctor that's watching you, they want to survey the room, the space, they want to make sure, right, it's as secure an environment as possible, something as if they were in a room with you that they could also oversee. When you get to the writing sample, I don't know what it is about the stress maybe of it, or maybe the awkwardness that you're doing this on the computer and you have somebody watching you. I don't know what the thought process is, but a lot of people panic and they'll finish the writing sample, but before they hit submit, and it kind of goes away, they'll pull out their phone and take a picture of it. That's an immediate violation, and no matter how innocent your thought process might have been, they will find that to be a violation that will go straight through misconduct. And so once you get a flag of misconduct on your file, and misconduct can also be, if you didn't disclose academic probation, for example, but the school asked you about it and you said no, and they saw it on the transcript, or they saw it on the notation from the transcript, all of those types of things, right? That's really a topic for character and fitness. But anything like that, where it can be perceived that you didn't follow the rules or that you misled the committee, even if it wasn't your intention, you're still held responsible for following the rules and answering the questions honestly. So this is one that LSAC just tells us so many people fall victim to this. So just don't panic. Don't assume that the thing is going to crash before you submit it. Don't pull out your phone. Don't try to write down the topic, so that you can save it to send to your friend or post it on Reddit. It's not worth it. So just be mindful, be really just focused on the rules, and you'll be okay. Okay. So here's going to be some of nitty gritty information. So I'm going to let you read, but again, if you just go to lsac.org, you're going to see all the information that we're going over here, basically verbatim. But I want to explain to you the concept of the calculation that LSAC makes. So I mentioned that you have to submit your transcripts and that we'll kind of get the summarization of your grades on that banner sheet. More importantly, what happens is, because different schools can have different grading policies or curves or inflation of grades, et cetera, lots of things could happen in all the thousands and tens of thousands of universities that there are. LSAC recalculates GPAs for every single law school applicant. And that's in an attempt to kind of normalize all of the GPAs. So if you went to a school that had a 5.0 scale, well, you know what? They don't use a 5.0 scale with LSAC. It's going to be a 4.0. So they're going to kind of do all the math, which is then what each law school will use. So on your LSAC account, I don't know exactly what they call it. It might just be cum GPA because that's what they call it for us. But you will have the ability to see the GPA that is calculated for you. Now, I'm going to show you some slides that have all the rules about how they make these calculations. But the long and short of it can be summarized in this way. If you've attended more than one school, which counts anything from the time that you took your first community college course, even if you were a high school student, all the way through the time your first bachelor's degree was conferred. And I said first on purpose. Some people have more than one bachelor's degree. The second one is considered to be graduate school experience, just FYI, even though the level of degree is still undergrad. So the first bachelor degree that you have conferred is sort of the bookend of the transcripts. Now, you can still submit graduate school transcripts or graduate work transcripts or certificates, things like a paralegal program, and they will be part of your CAS report. We will get the copy of the transcript from LSAC, but it'll not be part of the calculation. So just understand that distinction. So here in this required transcript to submit, you'll get this, bullet point list here. Again, if you took any community college courses, you transferred from community college to your four-year school, or you started at a four-year school, but during the summers you took community college courses, or during the summers you did classes at another four-year school, all of those transcripts must be submitted to LSAC. How this can impact your GPA is as follows. If you took classes, here's the most common example, and you transferred from community college to your four-year school. When you got to the four-year school and you were like, hi, I'm Lisa, I want to come here. Here are my 2 years worth of grades that I've already taken. They had somebody go through your transcript and say, okay, we give you credit for this and this and this. You got credit, right? You got advanced standing for the time when you transferred in, but you didn't get those grades. You started at the four-year school with a 0 GPA, right? Well, what LSAC does is they're going to calculate the grades from that community college. So if you did really well, you should hopefully see a boost in the GPA that you're otherwise thinking you have. So many people get to this application process and they will call up and they say, oh, I have a 155 and a 3.5 and it's blah, 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 blah. And I look them up and I'm like, you don't have a 3.5, you have a 2.8. And they are flabbergasted. They have no idea how they went from a 3.5, which is where they graduated from, let's say at UC Riverside, and now they have a 2.8. And that's because they weren't aware that those community college transcripts they submitted, where maybe they did very poorly, are now going to are going to pull down the GPA that they had from their four-year school. But if you did well, you can have the opposite happen. Even if you didn't attend more than one school, you can still have a change in your GPA. That can happen if you took the same class over, even at the same institution, for a better grade. So, calculus was never my friend. So if I took calculus and I got an F and I was like, man, I can't have an F on my transcript. That's going to ruin my GPA. Let me retake it. And the next semester I retake it and I give it 300% of my effort. And now I get an A and I'm like, wow, I killed it. Well, at my school, they probably gave me credit for that A. And the F, they might have just it'll be notated because I took the class, but it's not going to count against my GPA. But with LSAC, it's going to be averaged. So those are the kinds of things that you need to be aware of. So this slide here is just talking about the process with LSAC. So you have to have them all sent. They're going to need to be official transcripts through whatever method your school uses. Most schools these days are electronic. So you'll get the address and whatever, information you need from LSAC. You will then contact each of your schools and say, this is where I need the transcripts to go. They are official transcripts. For your records, as I mentioned earlier, you can ask for unofficial transcripts. You might even be able to pull them down just from your, student portal or something like that. You don't need an official transcript for your own review, but LSAC and any other institution that you might ultimately send a transcript to only wants to deal with official ones. So let's say you're still completing your degree. You don't have a final transcript yet showing your final degree has been completed. That's okay. We're going to review your file with where you are in the process, with the understanding that by the time the law school program starts, in the fall, that you will have already completed your degree requirements. Okay. So in that interim, let's say you're a December grad and you applied to law schools, this month in November. I know we're almost at the end. After your December grades come out and your degree is conferred, you're going to send an updated transcript to LSAC. They will flag it as a final transcript. And ultimately, then when you matriculate to your school in the fall, you'll be all set. You don't need to worry about that. Same thing applies if you're a spring grad or an early summer grad. If you're someone who doesn't anticipate that your degree will be conferred until the fall, that might get a little bit sticky. So you're going to need to contact each law school that you're applying to. What we have happen a couple times every year is somebody will say, I'm all done, I'm complete. I had one summer class and they might have taken it in July, but their degree didn't actually confer until September. You may miss the deadline that the school has to have your final transcript in. So again, that's a kind of individual school specific kind of question to ask. And if that pertains to you, ask it sooner rather than later. You may not know exactly if this is going to happen to you, but that's also part of your duty, is to see kind of, are you progressing in your degree at the pace that you anticipate? You don't want to be caught off guard, because every once in a while it is too late and then you have to, defer your enrollment. Okay, so here's all the nitty gritty about how they calculate GPAs. I mentioned they use the 4.0 scale. If you have a lot of withdrawals, that will catch our attention, meaning like just W's on your transcript. That will catch our attention. And that's probably something you should address in a GPA addendum or an academic addendum, but that's not going to negatively affect your GPA. A WF though, basically, which is a fail, that will negatively affect your GPA. So just things like that to be mindful of. Okay, so here's all the things that are excluded. So pass fails excluded, incompletes are excluded, things that were non-credit are excluded, again, just from the calculation. But we also don't want to see, whole semesters where all you took were pass-fail courses or just no credit courses, because that's not really telling us anything about the effort you put in. And part of what we're looking at when we look at your actual transcripts is we don't really care what major you have. Or you had if you've already completed your degree. You can go to law school and be very successful in your career with a non-traditional law major, right? You can be music or math or art or science, engineering, anything. But what we do want to see is you have a good breadth of coursework, because that will show us that you're really ready for law school. So if you're in school still, regardless of your major, make sure you're taking some, philosophy type courses, maybe take some logic courses. Those are things just to kind of prepare your brain for what's going to come with law school. Reading dense material, heavy, dense material, and trying to synthesize that information, right? That's going to be what reading your law school case books are going to be like. And that will just help you, further. If you haven't taken the LSAT, if you're, maybe thinking about applying for 24 or 25, you're a little further down the road, that's also going to help, because it's going to help you with the LSAT and doing things like the reading comprehension and the logic and the analytical section. So just some things like that to be mindful of. Again, all of these details you can find on the LSAC website. You can search for CAS, you can search for transcript summarization. All of those things will lead you to all of these details. So certainly you can screenshot it if you want to, but don't try to write it all down. This is a lot to kind of capture on your own. Okay, I mentioned failing grades. They are going to be counted against you. Repeated courses, we talked about that. That's kind of also similar to the academic forgiveness concept. Okay, course credits. Sometimes, depending on the grading system at the school that you've attended, some schools don't give grades. And if that's the case, then that's the case. But if you don't have a certain number of credit hours, then LSAC cannot do a GPA calculation. So that's kind of what this first part is talking about. And so we will basically get no grades for you, no calculation. It might just be a 0. Or, it might be a GPA that could be very high, it could be very low, but, it might just be for a small portion of the grades that you did earn if you met that threshold. There are some schools that just give what we call narratives. They're basically like little mini written evaluations without grades. Some schools give you the option. I know Santa Cruz for a while gave you the option of getting grades or these summaries. So we will adjust kind of as needed, but just be mindful if you're seeing something on your LSAC account that is surprising to you. Always a good idea to kind of ask about it a little bit further. Okay, so here's a difference between a degree GPA and a cum GPA. So here, this is kind of going back to that middle section of the banner sheet as an example. What's highlighted in the green or circled in the green, that's going to be like the 4-year school that you graduated from. That's where we'll see that. And it might come a little bit closer to the GPA that you saw on your transcript. Sorry, you're hearing my dog bark. She's excited to go for a walk right now. And what's in red, that's the main cumulative GPA. So remember again, they could be different, but what is circled there in red, the cumulative GPA, that's what every law school, every ABA law school is going to be using to review your file, as well as to consider you for merit scholarships, okay? Okay, so again, don't be surprised. Make sure you are, this is, I guess, where you can go and see it. Go to your academic summary and then go to your transcripts, and that's where you can find the calculated GPA. Okay, we also started receiving these types of notices from LSAC. So for many of you who were in school during, the height of COVID, and where many schools gave different kinds of grading options to kind of lessen, I guess, the stressfulness of getting grades during that period, we get these types of notifications as well. So again, if you haven't seen this before, this is just something that law schools receive. Excuse me. Okay. Letters of recommendation. They are very important to the application process. Now, some schools don't require it. Some schools do require it. Some schools require 1, like Southwestern. Some schools require 3. Some schools have a maximum. Southwestern's maximum is 3. Some schools require that they be a certain type of letter, say academic. Some schools can give you the option to kind of figure out for yourself if you want to submit academic versus professional, etc. There's a lot to kind of unpack here. But the main thing to kind of understand about letters of recommendation is to understand how we use them and why we think that they're important. So law schools use them, and reviewers of your file use them because it's the only portion in the application that really doesn't come from you, right? Somebody's going to tell us about you, and hopefully with your guidance that you have, guided them with things that you might want them to share, but it's still going to be a third party's opinion of you. And that can help support claims that you make about yourself. That can help support clues that we might start to form about you, assumptions that we form about you as we're reading your file. One thing I didn't say when I mentioned the 2 different types of documents that we receive, the CAS report and the electronic application, is which one we read first. And it's really up to the reader, and sometimes we kind of change as we go. I tend to read the CAS report first. I read the banner sheet first, and then I go through that entire document before I go to the electronic application. So the e-app is where things like your application are, your personal statement, diversity statement, resume, character and fitness statement, that's in the e-app. So I'm reading everything here, not getting really a voice of the applicant. until I get closer to the letters here where I kind of get a little bit more insight. So everything that I'm reading in terms of your scores, your transcripts, I'm building an image in my head of what I think you bring to my law school's community. And the letters help me sort of either confirm or deny the assumptions that I might have made. So they can be really important in that way. Now, the truth is the most important things in your application are probably going to be the two quantitative numbers, your LSAT and your GPA. But that doesn't mean that the other things, right? Look at that as like the skeleton of an application, right? But things like the personal statement, the letters, the addenda, all that other information you give us, that's what's really going to give the skeleton its shape. And that's where we're going to really be able to make distinctions between candidates and decide, between candidates who might have very similar looking scores, and help us really gain a better understanding of who each of you are in our application pools. So you can have letters address a number of different things, how you performed in the classroom, not always maybe at the top of the class, but maybe something you worked really hard to improve upon. Those can be really compelling. You can have your letters talk about, or have the recommenders talk about things that you really worked to overcome. You can have them talk about kind of the skills that we might be looking for, right? Trustworthiness, reliability, grit, good judgment, and have them kind of sprinkle that into their comments about you. How you submit them is pretty straightforward. They should go directly to LSAC. There's a letter of recommendation service. They can stay on file there for many, many, many years. So if you are, again, somebody who's applying a little bit later, not this year, but you're in school now, you should be thinking about people to ask to write these letters. You might never know who goes on, sabbatical, who retires, who moves schools. You might lose touch with somebody. So it's okay to have a letter go on file. And then when you get around to applying, as long as it's not too old, meaning like a year or so, you can still submit that letter. And in the cases where you really have lost touch or the person may have passed away, you can still explain to the school that's why the letter is, dated so far back, that you couldn't update it. So hopefully all that makes sense. Okay, so here's just some quick little excerpts here for you. There's a few on this page, and I think there's 3 on the next. So we'll have a little bit of discussion here. These are just some of the samples from letters that we've received. And if you want to just pop on, come off mute and tell me if you think any of these are effective or ineffective.
Well, C is definitely ineffective.
Okay. I tend to agree. And I do see some people in the chat. I apologize. I can't really read that as I talk, but when I get off the screen share, I will take a look at your questions in the chat. Okay, so does anybody think that C is effective? Does anybody think it's a good idea to have a family member write your letter? Not so much. Okay. What are some other examples of effective ones? Valerie, can I pick on you?
Sure. You said effective ones, correct?
Yes.
Let's see. I was looking at this formal logic class. I want to say maybe A. I mean, no, not A. Sorry, T. Just because that way they started. I like my applicant very much. Ineffective, I would say, for that one.
Ineffective?
Yeah.
Okay.
I would think A is ineffective, just because although it's a really good thing to be in the top 10% of students the professor is ever taught, I would imagine that should also be easily reflected in your just general transcript. So you would want your letters of recommendation to maybe reflect something that's not apparent from your
okay.
other.
All right, I can see what you mean by that. Okay. What else? Victoria, what do you think?
There's certain words I wouldn't use in B, but if I had to choose the most effective out of the options, I would choose B. I wouldn't have used the negative language that they struggled, but it does help to paint a picture of their growth in the teacher's other class.
Okay. Okay.
So the teacher is at least knows them beyond just that one course. So they have seen them struggling and seeing them excel as well.
Okay, great. Okay, so for my 2 cents, I agree that C is probably ineffective. And, I mentioned that letters can reflect your judgment, but probably the most important thing that I should tell you is that everything that you submit is actually something that we are judging. And so who you ask to write a letter on your behalf is also something that we judge. Sometimes people get caught up in the title or the position of their potential recommender. And they might think that if somebody holds a elected, office position, or that they are a very esteemed, endowed chair for professorship at their school, or that, their family member owns a law firm, it could be any and all of those things. We've seen all of that, that they think that those can make good letters. And it really just comes down to the relationship that you have with the candidate. That's probably the biggest takeaway, because the person can have a very impressive title, but if they don't really know you well, then they're not going to be able to contribute. And then just as a general rule, no letters from family members. In this particular case here, right, it says, excuse me, that she was a file clerk. There's somebody else there at that same firm that could write the letter. It doesn't have to actually be, your family member. So you got to think a little bit more how we might perceive the file and put yourself into our shoes. Now, I thought what Nigel was saying, about A made sense, that if this person was in the top 10%, we probably would be able to glean that from the rest of their grades. Maybe or maybe not. Maybe this was a particular class or, area of coursework that they maybe did a lot better in than others. So let's say, for example, that the student maybe switched majors and didn't do so well at the beginning and had very poor grades and then started to do better. So to have somebody actually say that you're a student at the top of their class could be a strategy. That's probably not true in every instance that I see it, but it could be an effective strategy depending on whatever else is happening in the file. And then, of course, right, these are just a few lines here or there. If somebody had used something like the language in A, but then went on to give us some more concrete examples, right, then we could work with it a little bit more too. But generally, something that is conveying somebody is working hard, performing well, and that this person has a lot of experience assessing these things. Generally, that works out okay. All right, here's another few for you to look at. Okay, I know these were a little bit longer, but whoever is finished first, any thoughts here? Melissa?
I kind of think everything in the first page you showed us was far more effective than anything you showed us on the second page.
Really? Okay.
Like for the first E and F, they're just talking about themselves basically and talking about like, oh, I did all this and I like this person, you should take him to law school or accept him to law school. And then the last one is like, I expect applicant will excel at whatever they choose. I think that's kind of a cop-out line. But I was wondering for like if you were to have a family member write a letter, if you sent it only specifically to the school where your family member was an alum, does that matter at all?
You still should not have a family member write on your behalf.
Okay, thank you.
I think the difference is, let me qualify that. I do have alums reach out sometimes and they'll say, hey, Melissa's my cousin, you know, you probably remember me, Dean Gear. I was in this program and I really love Southwestern and I told her how much I love Southwestern and she's applying to your school. I just wanted to put her on your radar. She's great. She's wonderful. You know, you'd love her. I don't take that kind of outreach is in the same category as like a letter of recommendation, right? Even if it came to me in written form. To me, I think, and this is just my opinion, other schools may, you know, differ. I think that's okay. I mean, I wouldn't like, that doesn't mean anything different in the outcome necessarily. But if they just want to say, hey, this person is my family member and, you know, like, I just want you to know that, that's okay. That's nothing I'm going to like discard or hold against the applicant in any way or think that's a bad reflection of their judgment. That's different than going to a family member and formally asking them to write a letter on your behalf, sending it through this process, right? That's kind of like another threshold. Does that make sense, the difference there, Melissa?
Yes, it does. I
Okay.
wasn't certain if there was a difference for like distant family members versus not, because I don't know, I assume distant families, like they don't have to like you versus like your mom and dad have to like you. So that's kind of where I got it from, but.
Yeah, sure. No, I could see that, you know, or sometimes it's like a very prominent attorney or, you know, who they've had a long legal history, you know, a long legal practice. And they're like, oh, my grandniece is lovely, you know.
Well,
I
not
mean,
even
that's
that, more
great.
just like a character assessment. Like sometimes that can be helpful or not
It's
really.
just never going to
That
be
comes with other-
believed. It's never going to be really believed as unbiased. And that's ultimately what it comes down to, because everything that you submit not only is a reflection of your judgment, but it's like finite real estate, right? And if a school only accepts one letter, let's say, or they only accept two, like, is this really the best foot you have to go forward with? You know, that you want to waste essentially the spot of somebody else who might have been your TA that you met with once a week and you climbed from the bottom of the class to the top of the class because you worked your, you know, your tail off to get there. I'd much rather read that letter. That's going to tell me something. Does that make sense? Like, you got to have a strategy here. And you got to know all the different things that you want to convey about yourself in the application, either yourself or asking somebody else to. So I'm going to just go to that next slide here because I think there's some other stuff you guys can read. Here we go. While I go to Valerie, let me just go over this really quickly. You want to be confident in everything that you're submitting. Certainly, you do need to give contextual information in your application. I mentioned things like an addendum, if there are some things that you need to disclose. Excuse me. But for the most part, you really want everything in your application to be strong and powerful and confident and to say, pick me. I'm the one you want, right? And so you have to think strategically, as I mentioned, about how you go about that. Now, we don't have a particular rule about academic versus professional in terms of type of letter. Many of our applicants have worked, you know, since high school through college and, you know, even after college if they're applying to law school later. So it's not uncommon for us to have professional letters. We're quite used to it. But I will say, if you are somebody who's getting close to graduating from a program or recently graduated, you should first think about getting an academic letter, right? We'll accept up to 3. These are Southwestern rules specifically that I'm talking about here. So we'll accept up to 3. It doesn't mean you need to supply 3. You also have to, you know, be mindful of how much content you are submitting. But you want to make sure you're choosing somebody who knows you, really knows you, not just knows of you. You want to choose somebody who you think is going to be a good advocate for you. Oftentimes, there are a handful of people that write a lot of letters at every school. And that could be because they have the most interactions with students, right? I mentioned TAs, or it could be because of their, you know, level of expertise or scholarship or position. You want to lead with who knows you best. That should be like your first criteria. And then of course you want to make sure that they can do these things in the time frame that you need them. So there were a good portion of you who hadn't yet asked your letters. You're still thinking about who to ask. You need to be thinking when you want to apply. I mentioned that earlier. You got to work backwards from that timeline. And you got to make sure that these letters are going to make their way out of your control to the law school by the time that you hope your file can be reviewed. At Southwestern in particular, because we do require at least one letter, we won't even get your CAS report. It won't even come to us if you haven't sent one letter so that we could receive it. So that could mean your file doesn't even get to us yet. It's not even something we could even review. So the clock on the review won't even start until everything is complete. So hopefully that all makes sense. Just some websites here. Again, if you want to screen grab them, you can. We technically only have about 5 minutes, but I know this is a lot of content. So let's plan to go to maybe about 5 after our event or 10 after, depending on your questions. And I'll try to take as many as I can. Okay, so I'm going to stop the screen share now and we'll dive into questions. Valerie, you had your hand up, you put it down. Did I answer it somehow or did you?
Oh, well, it was a comment based on the personal statement, just why they were kind of all biased in some way. But I do have a question regarding the personal statements since we're on that topic. If I submitted some for last registration semester, do you guys see those letters, or would it be best to submit some new ones, even if it's maybe from the same person or from a new person?
I'm sorry, how old are the ones you already submitted?
There may be, I want to say I was registering for last semester for the 2022 fall.
So they might be like from this past spring?
Yes, just for the fall semester.
That's probably recent enough. You should also know that if you're reapplying to a school, let's say you applied to Southwestern in 22 to start this past fall, and you're reapplying, I have all those ones already.
Okay.
So I have that personal statement, I have the resume, I have the diversity statement, I have the letters. So you definitely should update the file. So if you're talking specifically about the letters, try to find somebody new or go back to one of the same people and ask them to kind of basically write a new letter so that we get something fresh.
Okay, and if you guys recommend up to 3, you guys read every single one, not particular order, everything like that?
Just in the order that they're in the packet.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, before I go to the hands, there were some questions from a long time ago in the chat. So let me just kind of go through those. Okay, so Chinonso, there was we'll see the misconduct flag. There will also be a notation for the test date. And depending on what had happened, there may or may not actually be a letter from LSAC telling us that there was a test center violation. So because I'm not really sure how they determine kind of which of those things happens or what threshold you have to meet. So you should be prepared to mention it yourself. Kohar, you can mention multiple things in one addendum, but usually they're separate kinds of topics. So it's okay to submit multiple addenda. Okay, Desiree, the assignment, they kind of get dispatched as they come in. So you might go back and read. I'm not really sure, to be honest. This has always been kind of a little bit of a gray area. I think if you've reached a threshold, then you can start assigning the letters. Or if you get it on the front end before the letters come in, you can assign them. I'm not super sure yet, though. I'm sorry, I can't give you more accurate information about that. But there is a way that you assign letters to school. I just don't know the order of the steps that you have to do them in. And then if you went to undergrad and graduate school, does 1 GPA mean more on the application? The undergrad GPA, Elizabeth, is by far the more important GPA. That is because we do not require any kind of graduate school. No law school does. And also you have to maintain very high levels in your graduate program to even stay. So it kind of dilutes in some ways the appearance of those GPAs, because everybody that has, let's say a master's basically all has at least, kind of a decent GPA that we're looking at. And then let's see, if you transferred to another university and then transferred credits, do you still need both transcripts? Yes, you need every transcript, Dan, every single one. Okay, so to hands, Desiree, did you have an additional question?
Yes, this is in regards to the academic summary report. If I transferred my transcript, everything's fine. It says yes, received in August. I don't know, maybe it's something I have to ask LSAC, but I can't view the academic summary report. It says no transcript data analysis.
I would definitely call law school services.
Okay.
It should only take them a couple weeks. So if you've already done it, and they're telling you that they received it, it shouldn't be at this point kind of hidden from you.
Okay, and just to follow up, you said like if you
Oh,
had-
you know what? I'm sorry, Desiree. Let me also say, last week we were notified, not by LSAC, but we found out through some various other channels that there was a problem with something to do with the transcripts or the calculations. Like there was some error on LSAC's part and things were not processing. I don't know if there are more examples of that, and hopefully that is not what has happened to you, but definitely reach out to LSAC. If you are coming up against any deadlines for applications to schools, contact them as well. See, you can always do that too and see if they're seeing a GPA for you, even if you can't see it for yourself.
Okay.
There's some different ways you can kind of try to troubleshoot that.
I just wanted to follow up when you said like if you got an F in a class, maybe like your second year in undergrad, and then you retook it again, and you got an A. So just to be clear, like if it shows up even on your transcript that like you got an F, but then it shows up again, you got an A, it's going to average between that A and F.
Yep.
Okay.
That's exactly what's going to happen. You're essentially going to get a C, essentially the average of that calculated into your GPA.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Lauren.
Oh, I need to unmute myself. Thank you so much. Just to get clarity, the only way to submit the letters of recommendation is through LSAC? LSAC.
So technically no, but it is the most preferred way by law schools. A law school could specifically say that is the only way that they will receive them. Some law schools, will let you submit one to them, but they don't really want you to submit one to them. I'll just tell you that. They want it to go through LSAC because it comes all together. And like, for example, if I said to you, Lauren, you can send your letter to me. You can just send it directly to Southwestern, or rather you would have your recommender send it directly to Southwestern. It's not going to release your CAS report because the CAS report setting is saying, wait for a letter for Lauren before it will release. Because that's the setting I set up because that's how I want the file to come. So what then you put the school in the position to do is to do something irregular for you, which we might do, but we might forget. We might not do it when we think about it, get distracted by something else, or we may, sort of be burdened by having to do special things. So if it says something is preferred or recommended, my general advice is to read that as required.
Copy, thank you. And I get it. It legitimizes the letters as opposed to coming from me, just like a transcript. I understand.
Yeah, well, it should never come from the applicant themselves.
Right.
For many reasons. But, in the past, sometimes, like a recommender has wanted to send it directly. And if that's the case, if the recommender were to reach out and say, Dean Gear, can I send this to you for Lauren? I'm not going to say no because I don't want to disadvantage you by like shortchanging you on getting a letter, but it doesn't mean that that's how I would want the letter to come for you.
Right, but if like I had a recommender is like asking me to upload it to LSAC, I can't do that.
No,
Okay.
that's not how the process works.
Okay. And
Yeah,
one last,
it's pretty simple for them. I don't know how far you've gotten into this, but it's not that hard for them. You set it up, you basically say, this is going to be the person, you send them a link like to their email, they upload it, and that's it.
Easy. Okay, thank you. And one last question. When I'm ready to apply to law schools, I have to order a CAS report per law school, or does LSAT aggregate all of the law schools I'm applying to and distribute them to the law schools on their own?
You pay for the CAS service, that's one, but there's an individual law school report fee.
Okay, yeah, but do I have to like tell them like, okay, I'm applying to Southwestern right now, send them my CAS report right now?
You'll
Right.
basically be applying, if you apply to Southwestern, you're gonna apply through LSAC. They're gonna know it.
Got it. And so you will get all of my information
Yes.
through LSAC. Okay, cool, cool,
If you're
cool.
one of the people that gets an LSAC fee waiver, I think that gives you 4 law school reports included in that. And I think additionally, then you have to pay for those yourself. And they'll just be the first 4 that you do.
So it's just part of the application process.
Yes.
In general, it just, when you apply on LSAC,
Even if
you'll
you were to
get
go to the
everything.
Southwestern website and
Uh-huh.
click apply now, it's going to reroute you to LSAC. And
Oh,
that's
okay.
because that's where my application lives. That's where all of our applications live. So you're applying to me, but you're applying through LSAC.
Great. Thank you for answering all my questions. I hope you feel better and happy
Thank you.
holidays.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your time tonight. Hi, Victoria. What's your question?
If someone, if one of our recommenders has the same last name as us, but is not related, is that something they need to disclose within the letter, or is that something disclose in an addendum through the
And it's
council?
just purely by coincidence? Like it's just
Yeah.
a popular name?
Yeah.
Such an interesting question. I've literally never had to think about that before. Honestly, I would probably disclose it. I'd probably say, like, we're not related. You know,
within the letter.
whether or
Okay.
not you ask the recommender to say that, or whether or not you want to just submit a 2-line little addendum that says it, I probably would. Yeah, just so there's not any perceived confusion there.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, interesting question, Johnny.
Hi,
Hi.
my question is for, in terms of like choosing recommenders, one of the issues that I'm having is that a recommender that I want to use is a coach, not really a professor, just because he's also seen my academic journey and seen me grow and all that fun stuff. Is that still okay to use, even though I've never specifically seen him in the classroom, but he's seen my grades, he knows who I am as a student? Would that work still?
Because he's been your coach?
He's been my coach while I was
Actually,
in
not
college.
just a coach, he's been your coach.
Yes.
And who would your other recommenders be? What would be their type of roles?
The other one is between a professor and a professional letter of recommendation.
Okay. And you think they all could be of the same sort of strength?
I think the coach and the professional one would be stronger than the professor, just because I only got, when I transferred, I was only there at my transfer university for a quarter, and then COVID started.
see.
So
Okay.
they would know me better.
Okay. So my general sense is I think the coach one could be okay.
Okay.
I want to make sure though that you ask, part of what you're doing, you should meet with your potential recommenders, right? That's one of my little slides that sort of was talking through that. You want to meet with them, you want to give them your personal statement, give them your resume. Even if you know them well, don't assume that they just remember all these things about you off the top of their head, right?
Of course.
Arm them with information to write a compelling letter on your behalf. To that extent, if there are specific things that you feel like this coach could really speak to, ask them to do so. Like you're not writing the letter. You never want to do that. Don't ever agree to write a letter for somebody, because what they're really saying to you is, I don't feel strongly about you. I don't care enough to spend the time. I don't believe this is something you should do, take your pick. They're obviously not going to be your advocate.
Okay.
But that still doesn't mean you can't guide them. So if you want to say, hey coach, like if you could really just talk about those conversations that we had, or the times that I told you, how much I wanted to go to law school and what this would mean to me, or if they saw you through a journey, right? And I know sometimes with athletes, sometimes grades can suffer and you got to like work hard to bring them up, and whatever it could be, I don't know. But if there are just specific things, give him that information to ask him to specifically share.
Okay.
I think of a coach writing, it's sometimes similar to like an academic advisor. And obviously like an academic advisor sounds like it would be more academic, but it doesn't mean that they know you better. And I know sometimes coaches can be very pivotal relationships, and you can know them in much more greater depth than professors. Excuse me. So I'd probably go coach and professional if you think those are the two strongest. If you think the academic is good, you could also, right? You could go to the max. This is again speaking for Southwestern. You could go to our max. But remember, sometimes you want to have something in your pocket if you haven't gotten a decision yet, or if you're on the waiting list and you want to say, hey, is there anything else I can submit? You might want to have something else that you can pull out and say, here's another letter, or, you know, here's another statement, or whatever it might be that's appropriate at that time. So that still counts towards your maximum letters. So you don't always want to go with everything, or go with as strong as you can put together, but still be thinking about other potential opportunities.
Okay. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Sure. William, I see your hand up, but let me go to Sal first and then I'll.
Okay, okay, thank you.
Sure. Go ahead, Sal.
Hi, Lisa. So I have two questions. The first question is, Southwestern does the rolling admissions, correct?
Yes, most schools do.
So like, what does that actually mean right now? Like, are you guys getting together this week and looking at reports already? Or does it like start, let's say December 1st, or like, what does that
It's
look
already
like?
started. Most schools will have already started. So it depends on when schools kind of start that process, but usually it's in the fall. We start reviewing our applications, and then I can tell you we have not yet made any decisions. We haven't sent out any offers yet. Typically we would have by now, but we just haven't yet this year. But some of them will start to go out before the holiday break, and then we'll just continue reviewing and continue making decisions until
Okay.
the start of school. So
And then
that's what
here's-
rolling admissions means. It's just a continuous process.
And then my second question is, when I was applying, there was something called like early admission.
Mhm.
And it's a little confusing because it looks like the school would like to lock you in because you're saying, hey, you're my first choice.
Mhm.
But it doesn't make the most sense, because let's say you had 2 or 3 top choices, and like, let's say you took the first one
Mhm.
and they collect a fee from you, whatever. Let's say it's $500.
Mhm.
So am I understanding this correctly to say that if you were to just forfeit the $500 and let's say another school came by that wanted you, if you were okay with losing that $500, then you would just move on to the next school? Like, how does that work if because they're not all
okay.
calling you at the
So
same time?
that is still a thing. It's called early decision. Some schools have it, most do not. Southwestern does not. You have to look at what the terms say, because some are called a binding and some are called non-binding. So what early decision means is if you apply much earlier, usually by November or December or something like that, then the school is basically entering an agreement with you to give you a decision by whatever date they said, December 15th or January 1st. You know, I don't know. It can vary by school. They can decide to admit you, and then you'll have an earlier seat deposit date. They could decide to waitlist you, which basically just pushes you into the regular application cycle. Or they could, of course, deny your application. So same 3 potential outcomes as the regular application process. It just is a signal to them perhaps that you might be more interested. But if it's binding, what that means is the first one that you accept, right? They accepted you, you accepted them, and you paid, and that's it. You're really not supposed to take any other offer after that. Non-binding is probably more the way you were describing, that you could essentially forfeit the money and, you know, pay a deposit someplace else or pay multiple deposits and decide later. That's kind of what the non-binding kind of ultimately results in. But it's not super common to find early decision. Most schools don't use one. And if they do, they're admitting very few people.
Okay. All right, cool. Thank you.
Sure. Okay, before I go to you, William, let me just quickly go through some of these questions in this chat here.
Sure.
Dan, I understand what you're saying about the older undergraduate grades. Good thing for you though, there wasn't a lot of grade inflation back then. So by all means, still, give us your master's degree transcripts that are more recent, but just know that they're not going to be calculated into that GPA. Also, a coworker can write a letter for you, but ideally it would be somebody who has really been able to observe your work and not just sort of conveys like a friend kind of relationship. And then Chinoso, if you're planning to retake, you might want to submit an LSAT addendum and include what you scored on your practice tests. Sometimes that can be illustrative, but it is not uncommon to score lower on your real test than you did on your practice tests. Okay, William, you're on deck.
Yeah, how you doing? I just came in and I've missed most of what has been said previously, but your reference to a recommender, is that the same as letter of reference, or is
Exactly the same, yes.
Okay, that's all I'm
Yeah.
curious about.
And since you said you missed most of this has been recorded and it will be on our YouTube channel. So just check that periodically.
YouTube. Okay, thank you.
Sure.
That's good. All right.
Okay. All right. So I think that's everybody. Oh, Valerie, okay. You can get the one last question, Valerie.
Yeah, sorry. You mentioned about resubmitting. Since you guys already have all that, like transcripts, everything, do I have to resubmit everything again and addendum if I'm retaking the LSAT again?
You don't have to resubmit transcripts that you've already submitted. LSAC has those. The one difference I guess I would say is depending on, excuse me, if you submitted a final transcript or not. Hold on. If the final transcript that you submitted does not have your degree conferred or your last semester's worth of grades, you might need to submit that transcript. But if it already did, then you don't have to submit more transcripts. And an LSAT addendum is always on the table. Sorry, everybody, this coughing is kind of taking over now. So I think that's my cue.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining tonight. I really appreciate everybody and for staying late. And I hope this was helpful. As I mentioned, this will be on our YouTube channel. And if you have any additional questions, I will go ahead and put my email address in the chat. You are welcome to reach out. And I hope you all have a great holiday season and stay safe and take care.